Hello, fellow adventurers. Thank you for joining me. But quickly, we don't have a lot of time. For in this Roll for Crit review, we're taking a look at Fateforge, Chronicles of Kaan. In this dungeon crawler, you'll be playing through a campaign, choosing one of several heroes, possibly more if you own expansions, as you go through a story where you'll be using an app to make choices and, of course, fight enemies. But each combat round only has a certain number of rounds before you have to make a run for it to an exit. So, are you quick enough on your feet to make it through this storyline? Join me and let's find out. The game in this video was provided to Roll for Crit by its creators or publishers. Only the game was provided for the making of this video. Now here we have an example of a combat scene. This one is modeled after the first one you come across in the app that's meant to teach you how to play. However, I've made some slight changes to help explain some additional mechanics you'll come across as you continue to play the game. One thing that is consistent amongst all of these is you always have the start token, that's always where you start, and exits. No matter the combat scenario, at the end, you need to trace a line from wherever your characters are to one of the exits. Succeed or fail, the app will record what you did, and that will change how the story is going for you. Now, each combat scenario will consist of multiple rounds, usually 3 to 4, with the option of taking an extra combat round if you really feel like you need it in order to complete those final few objectives. Keep in mind, though, that if you choose to take that extra combat round, each player is going to have to draw one of these corruption cards. These stay with you until you find a unique way that allows you to get rid of corruption cards, and if you can't guess, are not going to be good for you. You will also draw from the corruption deck anytime that you are knocked out. Now, before each round, there is going to be a preparation phase. Here, each players are going to roll their dice and basically have an idea of what they're going to do. However, this is not all open information. Your dice are going to be rolled behind this screen so that only you really know what you have. And you can't tell people that you got 2 movement and a sword, though you could be more like, I can't help reach the objective right now. Can one of you guys take care of it? So keep that in mind when you decide how to work with your fellow players. Now, each character has their own starting set of dice. However, there are ways for you to get more dice. One of the main ones is through weapons. They can give you a weapon dice based on if they're a ranged or melee weapon. However, regardless of how many new dice you can be added to your pool, at the beginning of the preparation phase, you're going to choose 4 of these to roll, and you'll only be able to use those 4 when choosing what actions you're going to take on your turn. When you roll your dice, they can all have different faces, and like I said, based on the color, certain symbols may be more likely. Now, symbols that featuring a sword or an arrow are the main ways you're going to deal damage. Feet are how you move around, and this special symbol is used to usually trigger off skills. This symbol is a miss, unlike all the other dice, which tend to trigger things and can be used if there's a question mark. A symbol like that cannot be used unless it specifically is asked for in a skill or item. Anytime you contribute a die, you will then now have that symbol. If it has a brown background, that means you trigger that action right away. If it doesn't, that means that symbol then could be used for a different skill or item, allowing you to chain usually into much stronger abilities once you get into the late game when you have stronger items, as well as more powerful skills. Your board can hold up to 3 trinkets and 1 equipment, and there are 2 weapon slots. Sometimes there are items that will take up both slots. You also can get certain skills up here. These will be used for skill tests in which you roll the skill die, and depending on the difficulty, you roll 1 to 3 of those, with that being a success, and that symbol being success if you have the relevant skill as well. Each player has their own set of health and energy. If you go down to 0 health, you move your health down here. That is when you are knocked out, and you'll be forced to draw one of these corruption cards. Energy, on the other hand, is used for many different purposes. For example, getting extra movement on your turn, or you can spend 1 to re-roll misses if you happen to roll quite a bit of them. You also have the option to re-roll if you get a 3 of a kind in anything but misses. So you will have basic ways to mitigate your dice rolls, though. Keep in mind, your items and skills will be the main way for you to change up what you roll. The first important choice you're going to have to make before everything is whether to dash or not. This involves having your character getting a free move into an adjacent tile. Keep in mind, though, that if you start in a tile with enemies and you dash out of it, you're going to take damage from each enemy in that tile. The other major important choice to make is initiative. Now, there is going to be an initiative tile for each player, 1 for enemy reactions and 1 for the enemy's actual turn. In the app, it's going to tell you that a number of players are before the enemy reaction, and then everyone else goes after. the enemy turns are always at the end. In this case, we know one player gets to react before the enemies, while everyone else has to wait. The enemy reaction is different from the enemy turns. The app will choose 2 random enemies based on the enemies on the board, and only one of their discs will activate based on the lowest number. Now, while similar to the enemy cards, it will be slightly different, so keep that in mind. Now, once each player is finished with rolling, deciding if they're going to dash or not, and agreed upon the initiative turn track, each player will reveal their dice, showing what actions they're going to be taking, and starting, of course, with the first action tile, you're going to go from left to right, completing actions. So, hypothetically, let's say that the player here, that they were able to take out one of these pawns, and they decide to stay there for fear of this enemy moving up and attacking them. Then the enemies react, choosing 2 random ones, and the archer predicted correctly that the red enemy type was going to activate, and this one moves in to get in closer. Not the smartest move though, as this now goes into the player turns, and wouldn't you know it, we're able to take them out with one of our sword actions. This would allow us to continue moving forward, though this is where I want to go into these 2 tokens. Throughout the game, you may see food or gems. Anytime you are in a zone, aka a tile, with gem or food and no enemies, you can pick them up and add them to your party's tile. This is basically your collective bank, with gems being used to purchase either new powerful items or abilities, and of course food being able to be eaten between combat rounds in order to recover some health and energy. There are also sometimes hazards like this trap, which will usually harm you, though I'll wait until you come across them in your own campaign to find out how they act. There is also a chance that it could be things like chests. These are interactable items, usually requiring this symbol for you to interact with them, and you click on the app and they'll tell you what they do. Now, let's say all our characters have acted and they are now in these positions. Once everyone is done, all the enemies are going to do their actions based in this card order, and this time every single one of their pawns will act. It will still be in number order, but starting from the white, blue, red, green, then purple cards, you're going to do the actions based on the nearest hero to them. So in the case of the dog here, the nearest hero is 1 away, which allows them to move and do a close range attack. If there is a tie, that is what that red arrow means. It means whoever is in highest or lowest priority. So they'll always go for the closest player in their zone, but whenever there's a tie, that's when they'll decide based on priority. Arrows mean range attacks. They will always mean adjacent zones. So our archer here cannot target this character. However, the archer will target one of these 2 as they are in an adjacent zone. This, of course, will keep going until all tokens have acted. You'll start a new round, starting with a new preparation phase. This, of course, could change the order of these tokens, both how the app tells you where to put the reaction token and where you would like to go. Now, there are a few other things I want to go over really quickly. First off, you may notice these cubes on the purple leader. That's because it has armor. Players and enemies can both get armor. The difference between armor and health is that armor, when you deal damage to it, will absorb the damage, but it never comes back. For player characters, you will get your armor back from your items during a rest phase. Enemy health, however, let's say that we were able to only deal 2 damage to this guard, at the end of each round is healed back. The other important thing is guarding. There'll be exits, objectives, oftentimes guarded by this token clicked into that nice little place where it fits in, means that you cannot interact with it until you defeat the guard. More often than not, this is usually a major objective point that you have to deal with. Finally, one other thing I want to mention is there'll often be branching paths or even tiles that will appear or disappear, as well as enemies, during the rounds. This is important as 1, this means more enemies can hit the board, and 2, for example here, this may open up a path for you to avoid the trap by taking, in this case, a similar path, but more often not, a longer path, which, remember, you only have so much time in order to complete your objectives for this combat phase. Keep this going until the end of the final round in the app, where it will ask you if you want the extra combat step. Regardless of what happens at the end of the combat phase, let's say we've cleared up a few of these enemies. At the end, when you are told to draw a line to an exit, you'll have to count each enemy that you go through, including the tile that you're on. For any enemy you're forced to pass through, that's an extra damage you have to take. So for example, the shaman hero here, who's already at the end, is already at the exit, no problems. Everyone else, however, including the characters starting on a tile with 2 enemies, will have to go through that. Then you're going to click which objectives you completed, and from there, the app will tell you what to do. Each combat phase is going to be intertwined with some story beforehand, and usually multiple combat phases, ending up with a rest phase, which in the app is when you'll be able to purchase new items and skills, as well as heal up on health, usually accumulating in multiple rounds of these until you hit one with a boss. This will end the act, with 3 acts for the main campaign included in the core box. So at this point, I have played a ton of dungeon crawlers, and while not all of them are finished because they just sort of end up with limbo sometimes with me trying to get the players back together again, this is one, by the way, I have completed through. I did it with myself and another player, so that's 2 players. That is important because I do think the game might change a little bit, especially earlier on if you have more players, not just in the sense of how the game spawns with enemies, but the way that basically when you're rolling dice for combat, I do think early on it's a lot more detrimental if one player doesn't roll as well versus 3 other players also rolling. Regardless, I have seen one way the story can end. Can't tell you what every branching path goes to, though. I have a feeling about some of the things, which I'll get to a little bit later. But first, I want to talk about some of the things I really liked about this game. And the first thing is the combat. When I started this game and I learned you're going to be rolling 4 dice, and basically that's all you ever roll. Even now that I completed, I think there was 1 skill I saw that let me roll a 5th die. And part of me wondered whether they're not even like upgraded dice. There's just kinds of dice. Am I going to get that feeling of growing stronger, becoming more powerful? Come mid to late game, I definitely felt like I was that. I was playing the Forest Guardian, who's basically the archer class. And I basically felt like I was flipping over enemies while at the same time firing off more rounds than a submachine gun. And it felt very powerful and very good. That's because of the items and skills you get. Even if you only have 4 dice, what's going to start happening is you're building an engine. So even when you start getting those bad rolls near the later half of the game, unless you get like all misses, like the worst of the worst, usually you can still be like, all right, well, I'll take this die. It becomes this die. This one's going to become this action. And now with this, I can now do 5 damage to a bunch of targets, which feels really, really powerful. This is a game that I think rewards you for looking through your items and skills and coming up with just fun engines. And I feel like there are at least the 2 characters we use, the mercenary and the ranger, the forest guardian. I feel like there are also different builds you can end up with depending on which skills you decide to go with. So one forest ranger may look completely different from another person's forest ranger based on what skills they choose to focus in on. But the combat in terms of the players themselves, I think they did a fantastic job with the curve for the power fantasy of being able to still get that feeling of being an amazing hero. But, you're basically dealing with just 6 skills max and 4 dice and a few items as well. So nothing that is, I think, clogs up too much. And I really appreciated that. In terms of the actual combat itself, I actually think they did a great job with the round system. It does make things fast and tense, but I don't think they're too complicated. You still have an idea of what to do, how to deal with things. And it's not 3 rounds, you lose. It's 3 rounds. All right, you can get another combat round. You'll take a small penalty, and then you see where you are. And the reason I like that is it didn't just become we can't do this in a turn or 2. We auto lose, and then you just wait for the timer feeling bad. You can still get away with it. You just might be limping a little bit. Because of that, it didn't just become look at the objectives and kill the thing. It'd be like, all right, we want to make sure we can draw this clear line. So we should kill that enemy first. And then also because of that, you could be like, well, you know what? I can make it to that chest over there. I don't need to be the exit tile at the end because there's no enemies between me and the chest. Going over there is perfectly safe. I'll be able to open the chest in time. And then as long as no enemies accidentally reactively and move in my way, I'll be in the clear. And I really enjoyed that. I felt like there was that right amount of puzzling nature of us talking it out, while also, feeling like an action hero and either slicing up a bunch of people or shooting a bunch of arrows. And I appreciate that because sometimes I feel games can lean more one into the other. You're just a numbers generating machine killing things, or it doesn't really matter. You're trying to solve a puzzle in a certain number of turns, and if you don't solve in time, well, that's it. The enemies too, what I really love about this game is that they're discs. The reason I bring that up is with the exception of the zombie enemies, all of the discs are double-sided as different enemy types. So there's actually quite a nice wide variety of enemies you have to deal with. Now they are pretty similar. If like this red disc has two enemies that are usually the grunts, but they are slightly different both thematically. So, like these are the thieves, these are soldiers, and they have some different abilities tagged onto them. And that means you do feel like you're fighting in a city that actually has more than just soldiers. There are other things going around as well, and I really like that. Speaking of, the city map is fantastic. At first, I was like, why do we have this huge map? Why can't it be on the app? More on that line a little bit later. But you're going to be given multiple puzzles that are going to be along the lines of, all right, you're going to start at the arch. Here is a map leading to my boss. It'll say like, go to eyeball, go north. When you hit palm tree, go west. You have to actually look on the map, move your team miniature around, and make your way there. And I really like those kinds of puzzles because we have to be like, all right, there, south. It says here, oh, we got to turn here. We got to turn here. And multiple times that they use that to, I think, great advantage. And I think that makes it perfect to have the physical map there. And I really enjoyed those kinds of puzzles that were thrown in there as well. And side story wise, a lot of cute side stories, really fun. In particular, later on, you get one for each character. There was one for the mercenary that I thought was really cool and very rewarding, at least for someone who happens to like vengeance. But in terms of the side stories, like this map, the smaller battles, all of them are great. I do think on the larger sense, there are some hiccups. First off, let's go outside of the battles. The setup is going to take just as long as other games. You still have to go through tiles, put them down, and it was more of a pain because we did a lot of these back to back. But because of the quick combat time, I don't think these are as bad. In fact, I think this works still well because with the combat time shrunken down, this could work with a group that maybe isn't used to playing games that have 3 to 4 hour long combat sessions. Or maybe your play group wants to actually do more than just one session in their campaign game. And that's where I think this game can still survive. But the setup, you're still going to be looking through tiles and be like, what tile do we need? A22? This one? Yeah, okay. Going through like that. Second, the main story. You will be going through and making choices. And some of the things, especially on the smaller scale, will matter. And I enjoyed those. On the bigger scale, however, I think it's one of the things we've seen a lot of people complain more when it comes to video games when you have choices. I think it was the Telltale games that had this come up. Basically, something can tout it has a lot of major choices, but regardless of what choice you make, point A will still have you end up at point B. The way I know this is that I also got included. I mean, technically they're included in the base game itself, but I got the miniatures for bosses. And I hit every boss except for one who I am almost certain, because I got his disc in it, comes in the expansion. This means that while all the miniature enemies, like the minions, they are all double-sided. So sometimes you fight soldiers, sometimes you fight this, sometimes you fight this. You are always going to see the same boss at the end of each act. If the discs were double-sided, there could have been a thing if you sided with one person or a different one, you might have fought a different boss for that section. And that could have been really cool. And like I said, with the discs, it could have been done. But unfortunately, it does seem that no matter what you do, no matter what choices you make, maybe it might make it stronger or weaker, but you're still going to end up at the same major story plot beats, which could have been changed, like I said, with the disc. The final thing is the app. I have used multiple apps at this point for games as well. And I do think this game does some really cool stuff, but at the same time, there are a lot of things I felt like that could have been thrown into the app instead of the game. There are plenty of times where it's like, refer to the rule book, use the rule book. I'm like, couldn't you just had a tab in here that just says like elements? Click that. Like anything that involves like traps, or I guess I shouldn't say too much, but the different kinds of things that you can come across on the land. It says, use the unlock rules in the back of the book. I'm like, why isn't this in the app? And also not in the app, you do go to several other places. And in fact, the big map itself, where you want it, like location 1, there's a sheet with stickers you pull off. I'm like, this is a pain. This could have been in the app. You've unlocked this. You know section 1 now is the temple, or that this is the gardens. And the other map, 2 maps where you go to, you don't even really use for puzzles. They're just there for theme, and that could have been in the app of like, you are now in this area of this zone, which once again, don't want to say too much. I feel the app needs to be utilized more. Now, maybe it's because I'm the kind of guy who likes apps, who's played a lot of video games, so I know that is a hot topic in the board game world of games that use apps. But I feel like if you're going to use it, you got to go all in. You got to use it for a lot more, and they definitely could. That all said, in terms of just looking at the base game alone, I still think this game was a great experience. Going up through the campaign, I did enjoy the story, and I did see where my choices didn't matter. At the very end, they basically go through where you can sort of tell, like, all right, this happened because we did this, or this happened because we did this. And like I said, the mechanics themselves were really, really fun. And you know what's another great thing about an app? You can update it. It's really easy for them to add new things, and especially through the expansions. I'm told, at least from what I've read, the expansion that's already out is more challenging, which, by the way, if you are worried about challenge, there's an easy mode. They want you to be able to experience this game, and that's not something a lot of board games do. They seem to have this fixation of like, we don't want our game to be easy. Really, we need to calm down on that. I'm really happy they tried that. We just played it through the normal. I felt pretty confident in that. But the fact that it's there, to me, is something I'm really happy about. I am nitpicking on a lot of things here because I think they have the answers already to upgrade and make this feel much more, make the app feel much more integrated and being able to track a lot of more things. Make it so the boss discs can contain multiple bosses. So maybe you don't know, you might never fight this weird creature. For all you know, maybe the choices you make, maybe you'll go up against the king, or maybe you'll be fighting the rebel forces. This has everything it needs, and it's already got great mechanics built on. So while I do find faults in the overarching story, as well as in the app, I came out of this still enjoying a lot of it, still excited to actually play through the expansion, and maybe I'll use that as a moment to add in more players, because now that I know the rules a lot more and, want to play with more people than 2, I have that as an option. And if you're curious about this, I think this is a great dungeon explorer. You're going to have a lot of fun. And in particular, if you're someone who can't contribute like whole days to play multiple scenarios, you just have those few hours each week or month to play with your friends, this will fit into a lot of game groups still. Crits and misses for Fateforge, Chronicles of Kaan. Crits. While I played this at much larger sessions for the nature of having to review this, I believe being able to have the faster combat times means smaller sessions, which will be more manageable for groups that only have so much time to play games. Oftentimes, my normal gaming group meets up once a week, and it can be a little disheartening if we spend that entire time only playing one game. This can still be played, have an enjoyable experience, but have plenty of time to try out some other things. Either way, I think this game has more bite-sized, manageable moments that'll be more accessible to more players. Even when you're basically only ever going to be rolling 4 dice throughout the game, it still has a great power curve. As you unlock more items and more skills, you're going to change from being someone who's relying on the luck of the dice to being that epic action hero who's always able to get that final kill in. Outside of combat, I think they did a great job as well. The map provides some excellent puzzles, and the side quests were some of my favorites. There were fun little stories to find throughout the city, and not all of them will end up with you being a murder hobo. Misses. While I do feel like your choices affected you in the short run, long term, I don't think they mattered too much. And that's a bit disappointing because I feel like they actually had all the pieces to still make your choices still feel big, impactful, and matter, making it so people really felt like they had different endings based on what they did, rather than just taking a different journey to the same destination. I think there are plenty of components that were put outside the game that really could have been in the app, whether it be the story deck of cards or some other maps and names. These could have been added into the app in addition to what was already there. While I know apps are not some gamers' favorites, the fact that this one already has one makes me believe it should be used to its fullest. While I have problems with it because of the nature of this being a campaign game with an app, these could easily be fixed. Obviously, the app things could be downloaded and changed, but in future expansions, it wouldn't be hard to make it so it really does feel that if you decide to side with Team A, you're going to fight a dragon boss, but if you side with Team B, you're going to fight a demon. So regardless, you still feel like your choices matter in the story beats and it's reflected in what you see rather than in these smaller elements, which they already are pretty close to. And if they add more of the stuff that are physical, just tracked in the app, that means less things you need to have on the table, which makes it even simpler, more streamlined, and easier for this game to hit the table. You play maybe a session, you put it back, or maybe you play a second one that night. Regardless, I do think that they do a lot right. This definitely tries to be something that is friendly and respectful of players' time, especially maybe those who aren't used to those heavier, longer games. So if this is something you're interested in, the base is out right now. You can check it out. Like I said, I had the deluxe edition. I would probably recommend that in this case because I actually really like the wooden tiles for enemies. I think those work really nice. And of course, there's the first expansion. There should be a new crowdfunding for some new stuff as well. So you can keep an eye out if you want to add that to your collection or just buy it all there at once. But you can let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. As always, if you played this, do you agree that it feels like it's one of those games where you do have choices, but you're still going to the same destination? Am I being too nitpicky about what I want when something says your choices matter? I'd love to hear everything you have to say in the comments down below. Oh, and if you have played, I felt like the rapid fire on the Forest Guardian was pretty good. Is that way too good? Or do all the classes have something that feels that broken? Like I said, I only got to see the Mercenary as well, so I'd love to hear all your thoughts on that as well down below. But for now, I'm Will. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time on a Roll for Crit review.